I found OBI by getting the opportunity to work with Lisa some one on one. And I've been doing breath work for, personally, I've been doing breath work for probably about like 16, 17 years. And it was always one of the most powerful modalities of healing that I had experienced. But I had this really kind of like interesting story in my head when I like co-facilitated breathwork groups, which I did for a long time, or I experienced breathwork. Was kind of it was a story of like I don't get to do that, right? And like a lot of that is like my trauma story, is my scarcity story. I'm a survivor of childhood sexual and physical abuse, and while I have figured out ways to be successful and to thrive in my life, it wasn't always that way. And when I was first introduced into the world of breathwork as a participant, it was while I was recovering from addiction issues and unresolved trauma. But I still had this weird narrative that, like, oh, like more spiritual people get to do breath work, even though like I was an incredibly spiritual person, or like more grounded people, or more calm people, or more peaceful people get to do breath work. But it wasn't something that I got to do. And even though throughout the years, I started leading retreats in different groups and I would be co facilitating. I still sort of like put breath workers on this other tier that I wasn't able to reach. And that was such an interesting thing because when I met Lisa, I did a couple individual sessions with her and then I actually inquired to see what it would be like to just continue working with her individually, right? And and Lisa and Debbie are just so incredibly amazing. But my first exposure was to Lisa, and I had no clue that she had a school. I didn't know about any of that kind of stuff. And she presented the opportunity to me to be a student at One Breath Institute, and it was really cool how she did it. Right, like it wasn't a sales pitch. She actually like very much was just sort of like, hey, like you want to do a lot of breath work, and I think that you're supposed to be doing this work. And if you became a student of One Breath Institute and you went through this 2 year program, you would be getting to do a lot of breath work. You'd be getting to learn to do it. And I think you'd get the opportunity to essentially step into the kind of world and life that you want to live. And where I was at that time was I started a successful transitional living program for young men. And it was a program that specialized in young adult trauma. So we worked with individuals 18 to 30, roughly, and they had pretty significant childhood trauma and addiction issues. It was very hard, and I was really burnt out. And during that time, I also got diagnosed with cancer, with kidney cancer, and I ended up having several surgeries. My health wasn't great for a few years, and I got depressed, and I wasn't in love with the therapeutic work that I was doing anymore. And so I started doing this work with Lisa as I was coming out of essentially walking away from this business that I created. And I really like, I was actually at a place where I was like, do I even want to be a therapist anymore? To be honest with you, like, I was like, I've been a waiter before. Maybe I could just be a waiter again. It's not stressful, like, just figure things out. And when she presented the opportunity to do One Breath Institute, I was like really nervous. Like, all the scarcity mindset stuff that I have was popping up. It was like, oh man, you'll never make any money doing that, or it's not going to work. Or again, that narrative that I had about like other people get to do that stuff. And the truth is, the narrative was really more like other people get to do what they truly want to do. You need to settle. You need to play it safe. And that's an interesting thing because I think when people looked at me even before I started going into breath work, they probably would have seen somebody that they perceived as successful. I speak all over, I would do retreats, and I'm not saying that as like some sort of humble brag. It's just what I was doing. But I actually got really good at like doing risky things that I felt super comfortable with. It was all calculated risks. And for some reason, breath work felt like a really big edge for me. It was just scary. Like, financially was one piece, but that was actually just like kind of a small piece of it because, like, as a therapist, I knew that the OBI training was actually really affordable considering like all the things I was going to be receiving. I was one of those students, which was one of my favorite things as well about OBI is that I was one of those students that did support sessions with Vane like every week for a while, and I just absolutely loved it. And I think Vane is just an incredible human. And immediately, I just started noticing that the personal work that I was doing, I mean, and literally the first part of the training is called the personal journey. And I immediately started noticing that the personal work that I was doing was like neck and neck on par with the professional development that I was getting in breathwork. And that's a really rare thing to get in a training. I've done a lot of trainings over my 17 years as a mental health counselor. I'm a licensed professional therapist, and there's some trainings that you do and they are so boring that you're just like kicking yourself for signing up for them. There's some trainings that you do and they feel so sterile and impersonal, and you kind of just know you're never going to really use that modality, and you're just kind of like, all right, well, it's an interesting experience. There's some trainings that you do that you like know that this is going to inform the way that you work for the rest of your career. And then there's trainings like One Breath that was like, oh, this is not just going to change my career, but this is going to kind of change the trajectory of how I see myself in the world, which is a pretty incredible thing. And I was sort of playing it kind of slow as I first started going through One Breath. And well, not really. I was just taking my time, and I was being very careful about who I did individual sessions with and things like that. And I was just really getting comfortable, but I still kept like pressing up against this edge of like actually getting out there and like being like, I'm going to be a breath worker. I'm going to do these kind of things. And I was thinking about my graduation project, and at the same time, I was like, okay, what should I do? And then I had this treatment program that specializes in trauma for women reach out to me, and they wanted me to come out and do a training, and they wanted a big part of the work that I did out there with their clients and their staff to include some breath work. They wanted to see breath work, they'd heard about it, and so suddenly my graduation project was like plopped on my lap, and I was about to go from never really leading more than like two or three breathwork groups on my own to facilitating several breathwork groups with 30 highly traumatized women in a residential setting. And the thing I'll say about that is like obviously I had confidence in some ways, right? Like I've been a therapist for a really long time. I've worked in those settings. But the thing that I want to say that I love so much about One Breath Institute is that I don't think never before in other trainings that I've been in have I received so much support in like how to actually make this what you do, how to actually make it a business. I think that I've been to even really good trainings as a mental health counselor where still at the end of the day, they weren't really concerned whether or not you actually ever use this modality or not. Like they might say things like, yeah, don't be afraid, like get out there and start trying it. But like immediately I noticed that one of the goals of One Breath Institute was to make us breath workers, was like to really truly make us breath workers, was like to have it be part of our career, to have it be part of our everyday lives, and to have it be a major part of our income. So I remember when I was like almost nervous to tell Lisa, who was leading my cohort, that I was going to like jump this deep into the pool, because I thought she might like say something that I feel like other trainings might say, which is like, I don't know if you're ready for this yet. You need to like finish your 2 years before you do this. And not only was that not how I was met with so much encouragement. I was met with like specific guidance and specific instruction on how to be successful at it. And I was there for 4 days, and it just blew people's minds. Like the staff recognized changes, and I was weaving in other things. I do a lot of like parts work and like trauma work stuff. And what I was doing was my graduation project was about weaving in introspective breath work to help integrate deeper trauma healing work, right? And what they were noticing was we would be doing this deep trauma healing work with the clients, and then because of breath work, they were like felt free afterwards, right? Like something had been integrated. They weren't walking around and acting out as much. They weren't being triggered as often. All these kind of things. The staff was completely blown away, which led to me going out there several other times, and I still go out there to kind of help facilitate breathwork experiences for them. And immediately on the plane ride back, I was just like, okay, it's time. And I got on Canva and I started making flyers for my first community groups. I remember specifically on that flight, after doing the graduation project training thing that I did, where it like resonated with me, like so much of the stuff that we're taught in OBI, like it started to resonate towards like, yo, man, like you got to start just doing this, like you got to start like making the flyers and like sitting in the groups. And if like nobody shows up, nobody shows up. If two people show up, two people show up, and like, but just start having it be a thing. And people started trickling in, and kind of fast forward to now where I have my own breathwork space. It's where my private practice is too, but it's like an 800 square foot open space where I host typically 1 to 2 breathwork groups a month with about 18 to 20 people in them. and usually they're waitlisted. And like the reason why that feels important to me is because, again, I've never been to a training before where there was so much emphasis on spiritual and professional development as well as personal development, and things like having, Lisa and Debbie literally looking at my website and telling me how to tweak my website, literally like giving me suggestions on books to read, literally challenging me to take certain risks. And then it was the craziest thing. I would take a risk and like start, like for me, I'm just not a big social media guy. I've had times where other people have like managed that stuff for me and I'm not very active. And like getting on Instagram and making videos is not something I love to do. And they really push and encourage, and that was part of my challenges, was to get on Instagram. And I would start doing Instagram videos, and I would start getting people being like, I want to sign up for the class, I want to do this, I want you to come out and lead this training. And it just worked, and I think that anybody can go online or watch YouTube and like find out how to like be a social media entrepreneur or something like that. But it's very different doing that than actually having like coaches and mentors and people holding you accountable. And I love the way that Lisa and Debbie and the people involved in One Breath will like challenge you, like not in like a, hey, where's the post, man? But instead being like, yeah, what's that about? Like, why don't you want to make something? Like, why don't you like think that you deserve to like put yourself out there? What's crazy is that like legitimately when I started One Breath Institute, I think in the back of my mind, I really thought like, well, I mean, this will be an interesting experience. Like I've always wanted to do some breath work. So even if all I get from this is that like I learn more about breath work and get to do a ton of it in 2 years, then that's great. If you would have told me when I first started One Breath Institute that like breath work was going to legitimately be the vast majority of my focus professionally, I wouldn't have believed you. And I wouldn't have believed you for several reasons. Like some of it would have been time, some of it would have been not maybe thinking I could have made enough money doing that and things like that, not really knowing how to incorporate it. And, in the last 2 months, which have been busier than I normally am, but like it's been a fun, I've led, I think, 4 retreats and one training. And introspective breath work was at the center of all of those things. Like one example is, I think 3 weeks ago, I led this retreat at this really cool hot springs and in the mountains of Oregon. And it was the Healing the Healers retreat. So we had nurses and doctors and paramedics and social workers. And we did a lot of like wilderness ceremony and rites of passage work. But like really the crux of it, like sort of the peak moment, was doing an 80-minute introspective breathwork session. Now, all the things that we did that weekend led up to the experiences that they had. But by far, the most profound experience that all the participants had was in the breath work, right? It all culminated and all integrated all the work that we had done that weekend. And I think that's one of the biggest learning thing for me as a therapist that is like incredible to see, is that while I still have a private practice, while I still speak on other things other than breath work, I have found that breath work is probably one of the most effective tools I have to helping people release stored trauma and integrating deeper work, especially deeper parts work. So every single retreat or training that I do typically has like a pretty heavy emphasis on breath work, or at the very least, breath work is an experiential process that I'm doing to bring clients and staff together. Yeah, it doesn't seem to really be changing. New retreats are getting scheduled and new groups are getting scheduled, and breath work continues to be, yeah, to be a kind of a staple of the stuff I'm doing. And I 100%, I've had exposures to other breathwork trainings. Some of them were whatever. Some of them were very cool and very interesting. And until I found OBI, I never found one that was practical. So it fit into time. It like you could like mold and adjust your schedule to it, and was still a really deep healing experience and held you just as accountable for developing personally and professionally while weaving in actually how to make it your business. Like I don't think any other training I've been to actually had so much emphasis in making sure that people actually used the modality and made it part of their lives.